It's good I get to do the slot directly after lunch, so I'm not sure that I need to introduce myself at all, having that big, long bio intro from Nina, so thank you, Nina. This is my second time actually back at the HRD Congress, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I think we'll all agree that Dr. Bahia puts on an absolutely tremendous show and a tremendous opportunity for all of us as HR leaders to come together at this great annual conference and to discuss and debate all of the topics that are hot to us in the world of HR. Just as Nina had said, I've worked in 32 different countries across 3 continents. I had the privilege of working in India for 3 years down in Cochin in Kerala. So I'm always really delighted to be back in India. First and foremost, I'm here not as a consultant in any way. I'm here primarily as a HR practitioner. So I'm currently CHRO for an organization called Core HR. We're a HRIS organization. And I joined them 2 years ago to transform their business. And currently we're preparing IPO. So for any of you who has cycled through an IPO situation in your organizations, you'll understand just how busy that is for HR. But I'm here today to speak a little bit about, I'm lucky enough myself to have been working at the C-level strategic role in my business and in the previous 4 or 5 organizations that I've worked in at the C-level HR strategist level right up to and including the board level. And I'm very oftentimes asked by a lot of HR practitioners about, why is it that we find it so difficult as HR practitioners to get to that C-level? Why is HR always the organization having to justify its place at the board table? Why are we always struggling? Regardless of the cultures that I've worked in, regardless of the industries I've worked in, there has always been that struggle. And so I'm going to share a little bit about my perspective as to what I think are the impediments, and certainly the impediments that I came across throughout my career, and hopefully we can in some way maybe inform. I saw a lot of the students from the university here this morning at the opening, and I spoke to some of them. They're all very energized about coming into the world of HR. So I do think that those of us who have cycled through our careers in the world of HR, we have an obligation to those students to help them not to fall into the same pitfalls that maybe we have fallen into as a HR function down through the many decades in trying to find our place working at that C-level within our organizations. And so this is why you'll see the topic that I've chosen today. Actually, the title of the slide is not correct. The title of my presentation is around HR, what I term HR sophistication bias. And what I mean by HR sophistication bias is, why do we always need to be the function within our organizations that tend to overcomplicate everything? Why are we always the function that's always coming with the next best practice? And in doing so, we bamboozle not alone ourselves, but the organizations whom we are working with and serving. And so we need to find a way to not fall into that HR sophistication bias trap. And again, this is just my own opinion, as I said, as a HR practitioner. So firstly, I would just like us to maybe reflect a little bit on the typical type of a journey that you cycle through when you enter the world of HR. How do our careers evolve? How do we come from working at from stepping into the world of HR when we finish our education in college or otherwise, to when we move into, let's say, the operational exposures? That's where you gain, in that first little juncture, that's where you're likely to gain the most valuable HR experience that will serve you for the rest of your career. So trying to sidetrack or trying to fast track through that operational exposure and experience doesn't serve you very, very well later. So we go into the operational exposure elements of our careers. Then if we're lucky, we start maybe exploring and getting experience in cross-industry exposures. And then the real richness of our HR experience comes from the next juncture, which is where we might have some cross-cultural exposures, where we start working with and understanding people of different cultures. And as I said, having worked in 32 different countries across 3 continents, I have learned that people are people regardless of which culture you're in. And the same basic principles apply to leading people in Ireland, which is where I come from, versus leading people in China, India, Malaysia, all of the areas that Nina mentioned that I've worked in. So people are people, and people have the same needs from their organizations, and particularly from us as HR professionals, regardless of our industry, regardless of our culture, regardless of our country. And so we continue that cultural exposure, and if we're lucky enough, we step into some global exposures where we start leading cross global initiatives for multinational organizations. So the organizations that I've worked in, we have had operations primarily in this part of the world, but also in the North, South Americas, in Europe. And so that's where I certainly would have gained quite a lot of my global cultural exposures. And then, of course, from those global exposures and from those cross-cultural experiences working in HR, we then start navigating into the world of enterprise-wide transformations, where we as a function are generally tasked with actually being the accelerant function to enable change and transformation within organizations. And so very oftentimes the task falls with us as a function to enable all of that change and to actually ignite the change initiatives that need to happen within organizations to bring them from A to B. And then if we're through all of that expertise and all that experience, we should find ourselves gaining exposure and gaining some awareness from our C-level people within our organizations saying, hey, HR are really adding value here. HR are really the accelerant function that are helping us to get from here to here. And so this deserves to have acknowledgement at the C-level in our organization. And then from there, you become the recognized thought leader within and beyond your own organization. So I think, is there anybody here who can't really connect with that sort of a path that HR naturally goes through? We can all connect with different junctures there. Okay, so why is it then that very oftentimes we find ourselves stagnating, struggling, regardless of the culture, regardless of the industry, regardless of the country we work in? We typically find ourselves struggling a little bit to get from that global exposure into the enterprise transformations. And the biggest struggle that we find, and no matter what HR person I speak to, they find that the biggest gap that they need to try and bridge comes between the enterprise transformation and becoming that C-level strategist. And so if you think about, if you just think about some of the research that we've done and why are we struggling as a HR organization and as a HR function within our organizations, why do we struggle? So Page Up Global Research is a company that's London-based. They have what they call a talent lab in a number of parts of the world, and they bring HR. Their latest research is entitled "Bringing HR Under the Microscope." Why are we struggling as a function to bridge that gap and to get to that strategist position within our organizations? And it's because their research tells us that 70% of our organizations are still yet to recognize and acknowledge us as a strategic function or having a strategic place and position within our organizations. And what's more, 38% of the executives who were surveyed in that piece of research, so the C-level, our colleagues in other functions at the C-level, at the board level, they still believe that HR's function exists in the traditional mode, managing compensation and benefits, and being the compliance function, the police station function. And so with 38% of executives still believing this, according to this research, is it any wonder that we have this struggle as a HR function? So, but yet, if we think about it, and if we survey any of those 38% of executives, they will tell you that people create all value in their business. Not the product, not the service, but it's the people who create all value in a business. That has become my personal mantra. Any of the conferences that I speak with, I begin with this. It's people who create value in organizations. That's me with my boss actually last July when we smashed a Guinness World Record for the largest human URL in our organization. That was photographed in Southern Ireland. But yet, people create all value. And so if we keep that in mind and consider, and again I keep coming back to the fact that irrespective of which culture you work in, which country you work in, or which industry you work in, our people come to work with very similar intentions and expectations. So it shouldn't be that difficult for HR to get it right. It shouldn't be that difficult for HR to prove day after day through the right initiatives that we are the accelerant function within our organizations in enabling change. And if we take a very quick look at collectively, as I say, regardless of which corner of the world we work in, if we look at the intentions and expectations of our employees, they can be categorized in 4 areas. And this is the general population of employees. This is not our high potentials. This is not our top-tier talent. This is our general employee population. Every employee in every organization, in every culture, of every generation. We heard the speaker before lunch speak about the millennials. This research talks about the general population, every generation. So our employees come to work every day with the intention to do a great job. First basis of understanding. And if we can craft all of our initiatives from a HR perspective, from an organizational perspective, around that basic premise and that belief that every employee in our business every day comes to work with the intention to do a smashing job, then we won't go too far wrong in crafting our HR strategy and initiatives. And that's fact. I know of no employee. How many of us have constant performance improvement plans, PIPs we call them, or now we're of course using the new word of employee success program because of the negative connotation that goes with the word PIP. We all have them going in our organization, and all of our employees who are currently on performance improvement plans, there's not one of them who intend to come to work to do a bad job. Nobody rocks up to work every morning and says, guess what, I'm going to go in there and do a crap job today. Nobody in this world. So we've got to keep this in mind as we cycle through designing our HR strategies and initiatives. The second thing is that our employees expect to fully utilize their skills. So they go to college, they train, they do external training programs, they expend a lot of time and effort in training themselves and educating themselves. And when we hire them, and we take a lot of time and effort to decide who can and cannot work in our organization because sometimes of our very elaborate recruitment processes, and yet we hire people, we bring them into our business, and we don't utilize their skills. Our employees collectively expect accelerated development. Every country, every generation, we expect accelerated development. And finally, every employee expects and deserves great leaders. So if we have leaders within our organizations that are not leader fit, then we got to be coming back to this and remembering this key point. Our smart talent. Our smart talent, if we look at the research around what the expectations and intentions of our smart talent is, we hear that these are our people who come to work with the mindset, perform to transform. These are the people who we hire into our business, our smart talent. These folks mean business in our organizations. These are our game changers. These are the top tier talent within our organizations who we will rely upon to drive the raising the bar culture. They absolutely expect and assume that they will work in high-performing teams. They expect to work in technologically advanced environments. So if we're operating in an organization that does not have or does not deploy or adopt the best HR technologies that are out there and the best systems of work that are out there in terms of technology, then our top-tier performers will be disappointed when we hire them. And likewise, our top-tier performers, they expect competent leaders. But yet, if we look at, again, the research that was done by our friends back in London, of 1,000 pre-selected top-tier performers in organizations across Europe, and I would bet my house on it, and my house isn't worth that much money, but I would bet my house on it that it would be the same if we surveyed in this corner of the world. 96% of our top-tier talent, our smart talent, believe that their skills are underutilized in their current role. So despite our elaborate sophistication around getting it right to hire the right people for the right job, for the right space, to sit in the right seat, we're underutilizing their talent according to them. And only 36% of them believe that their organizations actually care about their career development. So 64% of those 1,000 top-tier talent believe that we don't care, or that their organization doesn't care about their career development. And worse again, the research outcome tells us that 43% of those top-tier talent are currently considering leaving our organizations right now because of the 3 statistics that I shared earlier. So, putting insights into action, we have the data from a HR perspective. I think we're probably the function that most engages in surveys. We're constantly doing some salary surveys. We're constantly out there looking for the next best practice HR that's happening in the world of, let it be the CIPD or whichever professional body represents us in whatever corner of the world we happen to live in. We have more access to data in HR than any other function. But yet, despite us having all of this, we continue to drive sophistication into everything we do, and we fail to get the basics right. And so I'm going to share with you something that I conceptualized actually while I was visiting India last year. And my husband traveled with me. My son Colin is here with me this year. I always like to take the opportunity to introduce India to my family when I get the opportunity to come. And so while traveling around the Golden Triangle last year with my husband, I actually came across a concept that I had to help us as HR professionals to keep things simple and to focus on what I think are the only 3 things that HR should have in any HR strategy. And I think if we focus on these 3 things, now the initiatives that you will have going in the areas may be different depending on your organizational context, but if we are to focus on what I call HR's golden triangle: culture, leadership, technology. Every initiative that I now run, every HR strategy that I develop, if it doesn't fit in one of these categories, these 3 categories, I don't do it. So if you think about maybe some of the initiatives you have going in your organizations right now, I would bet that maybe they clearly fit in one of these 3. And if you can use this little model as I've used it, it will help you to not fall into this HR sophistication bias trap that I've referred to earlier. I don't have the time, obviously, because of the time restraints on the presentation today, to tell you too much about what I'm doing in the current context of my existing organization in each of these areas, but I can maybe just share a little bit around the components that I would rely on. If you're in an organization, if we look at culture, first of all, and the cultural DNA being the driving point for really transforming businesses, your cultural DNA is something that you really need to understand. Your employees need to understand what your cultural DNA is. And internalizing the definitions around culture is vitally important. If you're in the lucky position, I found myself when I joined Core HR 2 years ago, they didn't have any stated cultural values. So I had the unique opportunity to actually pass the baton to the employees, all 350 employees, and asked, we're in the middle of a huge transformation in our business. We've got a new CEO. We've got some new products. We're becoming a new core HR. And how can we ensure that we firstly understand our culture, and then how do we make better our culture? And I asked the employees, who some of them had 30 years legacy with the business, I asked them just 3 questions. First question is, think about what of the old culture is good and we would like to keep? And so they thought about that, and everybody contributed. The second question I asked them, what of the old culture is not so good and we would like to remove, eradicate in the new culture? And the third question, which was probably the most powerful and gave me and HR and my team, and of course the management team beyond HR, the collateral that we use a lot today. And that third question around culture was, what never existed in the legacy culture that we would never want to creep into the new culture? And that was the most powerful question, because that was the employees writing down the things that never existed and we would never want it to exist. And actually, this is what the behaviors might look like if this culture started to develop in our organization. And it's that collateral that actually now gives us the collateral is probably the word, to say, hold on a minute, when you see something happening culturally that's not right or doesn't feel right, you say, collectively we decided that has no place and position in our organization. So if you have the opportunity to hand the baton to your employees, that's always a very powerful place to start. In terms of leader fit, we spoke about the expectations that every employee has when they come to work. They expect a competent leader. We expect competent teachers when we're going to school. So why would we not expect competent leaders when we're in our adulthood, evolving our careers and our professional education and our continuing professional development? So from a HR perspective, you have the responsibility to ensure that you're providing, number one, responsible leaders into the organization, and that you're assessing the leader fit competence of your leaders on an ongoing basis. And there's only 4 areas on leadership development that I'm ever interested in having engineered into any leadership development program. Thought leadership, ensuring that your leaders, we heard a speaker this morning talk about the disconnect that happens between strategy and execution. I think it was the speaker just before lunch again. That disconnect because your middle leaders don't understand what the strategy is. And so you're missing the thought leadership that helps the troops on the ground to connect with the strategy. So thought leadership, results leadership, of course, all about execution. Personal leadership. If you don't know who you are as a leader, how can you expect to know and understand the people working for you? So if you've got any leadership development programs running in your organization right now today, and if it lacks or doesn't have a component that actually focuses on self-awareness and getting the leader to fully understand who they are, then you really should look at the effectiveness of the leadership development program. And of course, finally, people leadership in terms of empowering people, ensuring that people have the right levels of autonomy to do their jobs at the local level. And the third part of that golden triangle, so we've spoken about culture, we've spoken a little bit about leadership development, and I'm really cycling through this very quickly. But the final one is technology. And I do work for a technology company, Core HR. I'm not here to sell Core HR, but I am here to sell HR technology as an enabler for the HR function. How many of us have found ourselves working in organizations where we were not able, because we didn't have the right HR technology, we were not able to provide objective facts and evidence into the business? And that's exactly where we get caught and have gotten caught as a function down through the years. We have not been fact-driven. We have not been able to give and enable that objective people planning because we did not have the data. We now need to insist on having the right technology at our fingertips. So whether it's ADP or Workday or Core HR, Oracle, whichever system we're using, we better be sure that it is providing us as the HR teams with that objective facts and evidence that we can provide that finally gets us that place and position. This is a little model that I developed that I thought might be useful to share with you. Again, we talk forever about communications within our business. HR is the organization that's generally tasked with ensuring that we have robust communication strategies going on inside our organizations. And so this little model forces me to think about whether we have enough cadence going on within the organization from manager to manager. So you list down, if you want to do a proper audit on how your organization is doing with respect to communications cadence, you list down all the things that you're doing. What happens? What forums do we have for manager to manager communications? And you write them down. And you look at what forums do we have for employees to executives. How do our employees communicate with our executives and vice versa? And then you look at employee to employee. How do the employees connect with each other? So using this helps you, and I just happen to call it in my business, I call it in the loop. Feel free to take it, but we call it the in the loop framework. And it ensures that, and we get employees to contribute to this. We ask them, where are we lacking? Can you write down the things that might get added to the exec to employee forums, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're empowering the employees to come up and craft your communication strategy. So feel free to use that. It has served me very well from a HR perspective, so feel free to use it. Key takeaways, and my time is up. I can see Nina waving at me. Oh, I'm good. So the key takeaway is we have the data from a HR perspective. As I said, we're the function that has the most data. Let's just use what's useful for us in helping us to provide that objective data back into the organization so that our value can truly be seen as the accelerant function and the accelerant enabler within our organizations for that strategic level change that ultimately gets us to that strategic level within our business. So the golden triangle, I've relied upon it. I will continue to rely upon it. As I say, I'm absolutely delighted to say that it was inspired during my trip to India last year, and I had our graphics designers look at doing something very simple because obviously, again, I didn't want to overcomplicate it, so I thought the three things and the three angles are quite simple. And feel free to share that inside your organizations from a HR perspective. But I would think just if you're doing a due diligence on your HR strategy, maybe keep the golden triangle in mind and see how many of those areas of the triangle are you, maybe how many initiatives do you have going on within your organization that you're putting your name to as the HR sponsor that may not be fitting in that golden triangle and may not be fitting for the objectives of your organization going forward. So thank you very much indeed. I'm actually here for the rest of the afternoon. If anybody wants to ask me any questions on any aspect of the HR Golden Triangle, then please feel free to approach me directly. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.